Hi there, it's July the 15th and we continue our journey through the first book of Chronicles, and we are coming to 1 Chronicles 19, 20 and 21. Now we are finding David here consolidating his kingdom. We see that he's put down his enemies around and that his kingdom is extending, but he recognizes that he has obligations through having made covenants with various rulers around, and in chapter 19 he recognizes his obligation through covenant with Nahash the Ammonite. Now it's interesting that we don't find any mention of the kindness that Nahash has done to David. In fact, earlier on in 1 Samuel we see that Nahash the Ammonite actually makes war, makes battle, or attacks and threatens Israel. So we're not sure what the arrangement is, and we're also not talking about kindness here. The old versions have kindness. David wanted to be kind to the son of Nahash, who is mourning his father who's just died, but it's not the kind of kindness that is about I feel well disposed towards. This is actually a covenant obligation, and the word that's used for kindness is that wonderful word hesed, that means David sees he has an obligation. So he sends a delegation to the son of Nahash, who is grieving his father, to say, is there anything we can do to recognize our covenant obligation? But the advisors of the son of Nahash say, listen, these Israelites who've come in the name of David are actually out to get you, and they're out to spy, and they're going to attack you. David is going to overwhelm you. And so they mistreat the messengers of David, and they abuse them, and they cut off their garments, and they shame them greatly. And when David hears about this, obviously he's really angry, and he makes war against the Ammonites. Now the Ammonites don't see themselves as being capable on their own to stand against David, and so they call in the Syrians, which is a next door neighbour, a powerful army under the leadership of their king Hadadezer. David actually sets his troops against the Syrians and the Ammonites, connected through his commanders Joab and Abishai, his brother. And so they go into battle and they soundly defeat the Ammonites and the Syrians together, and they overwhelm them and they push them back. Then in chapter 20 we see that David goes to Rabbah and he takes the crown of the Ammonite king and the Syrian kings, and he takes it for himself, and he establishes his kingdom even further through this action, through this battle action, and we see that his kingdom is extending. Now chapter 21 is really interesting, because chapter 21 seems to suggest that David has kind of got to the greatness of his power, but he's kind of overreaching himself here. At the beginning of chapter 21, some versions say that Satan rose up against Israel, but the word Satan in Hebrew actually means an adversary. So at the beginning of chapter 21 of 1 Chronicles, we read that an adversary rises up against Israel. Now it's not specified which adversary it is, but what happens here is that David, having seen his kingdom extended, having seen God establish his kingdom powerfully, he now fears whether he's got enough troops to stand against this adversary that's coming against him. And so he calls for a census, he calls for a numbering of the fighting men of Israel. Now his commander Joab is really unhappy about this, because he knows that under the law of God, under Torah, every census, only censuses that are authorized by God may be taken, and when they are taken there is an offering that has to be made to the Lord. But David insists that he wants to know how many fighting men he's got to see whether he can stand against this Satan, against this adversary that's coming against him. And so Joab goes throughout Israel, but interestingly Joab doesn't number the Levites, and he doesn't number the tribe of Benjamin. It says he's so appalled at what David is doing, he doesn't contaminate them with this command. Sure enough, God is angry with David, and through Gad the prophet he sends a message saying to David, you're in trouble, you've done something that's unauthorized by God. Choose whether you're going to have 3 years of famine, or 3 months of attack by your enemies, or 3 days of plague. And David says, I've done wrong, I've sinned, and I would rather fall into the hands of God than fall into the hands of men, so I choose the 3 days of plague. And in 3 days of plague, 70,000 people die in Israel. It's a terrible time, and God is about to strike down Jerusalem. And the angel of death, or the angel of plague, comes to Jerusalem. But the Lord repents what he's doing. He says, I've changed my mind, stop. And the angel that is causing this plague stops at the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. The Jebusites being the previous inhabitants of Jerusalem. So this is taking place in David's city, in David's around the area of Zion, around the area of modern-day Jerusalem. And at this point, Gad says you need to build an altar on the threshing floor of Ornan where this angel is. And by the way, Ornan and his sons have seen this angel, and they're terrified of what they've seen, because they've seen God's presence come to this, just to their threshing floor, to the place where they prepare their wheat for milling. And David says, okay, I'm going to buy the threshing floor of Ornan, and I'm going to build an altar of God there. He offers, he goes and he offers Ornan the full price for the land on which his threshing floor is built. Ornan, out of fear, says, no, you can have it, take it. In fact, I'll even offer you the oxen and the sacrifices. Just have it, because he sees the terrible thing that's happening. But David says, no, I won't offer the Lord something that costs me nothing. A very key phrase here. And so he buys the threshing floor of Ornan, and this becomes the place on which the temple is going to be built, where the house of God is going to be built, and David will begin to gather materials for the building of the house of the Lord, of the temple, which his son Solomon will execute a little later on. It's important that we recognize God's place in our lives is supreme, and that when we try and take things into our own hands, things inevitably go very pear-shaped. Here God has said to David, I am in charge. I am the one who is in charge of the power that you think you have, you don't have. It's my power. It's my ability. And David acknowledges that through making the sacrifice and through paying the full price, giving the full price for Ornan's threshing floor. It's important that when we come before the Lord, we don't bring the Lord offerings that cost us nothing. Sacrifice is about laying something down before the Lord. And so today, as we worship him, as we think about the Lord and all that he means to us, let's ask ourselves again, how much am I giving? Am I giving myself, my whole body, as Paul says in Romans 12, as a living sacrifice, holy, pleasing and acceptable to God? Have a very good July the 15th.